Hello, and welcome to another episode of Brettcast Gaming Talk. Horror is not the kind of genre that I typically do anything with outside of a few of those cheesy bad horror movies, but I decided that I wanted to try another horror video game, and so I went for the game that I'm going to be talking about today, and that is Resident Evil 7 Biohazard. Now, this is about the second horror game I've played, the first being one called Observer, but it's the first Resident Evil game I've played, and the first horror game that I've finished, which is a big deal for me. I believe that this game is supposed to be a reboot for the Resident Evil game series, and if that is the case, then I'm on board with this because this was a pretty fun game, honestly. Look, I have watched and enjoyed the Resident Evil movies. I know some people don't like them, but I find them fun. And so I had some interest in the games, but then I look at the older games, I'm like, no, this is not really for me. At least up until this game. It's got first-person shooting, which I like. It has a pretty good horror atmosphere, which really worked out well for this game. The atmosphere is the top thing that I liked about this game. If there's one thing in movies and video games that is important, is knowing when to use music and how much of it to use, or in the case of Resident Evil 7, when not to use music, which is pretty much all of the time. Yes, there is hardly any music in this game. The only time I notice music is when there's some sort of enemy encounter happening, and that's really it. When you're walking around and exploring, you just hear creepy ambiance, and that's it. And it makes the whole game and everything just so much creepier. I will admit that I did get startled a few times in the beginning of the game, mostly when Mia jumps out at you, but the further I got into the game, the less I had any of that happen, and the less anything kind of really popped out at me. So the story for the game is excellent and told pretty well. I mean, when you start the game, you just go to this house looking for your wife, and then you get thrown into this whole situation that your character and you don't really understand why you are so important in all of it. I'm not going to get into the specifics of the story because it's something that should be enjoyed and experienced. However, I do think the beginning was kind of rushed because they kind of just do as much as they can to be okay, now you're at Creepy House. And that's kind of it. Something this game did teach me, since it's my first survival horror game, is to check everything, everywhere that you can, because you never know where you're going to find something important, and that everything is useful. I thought those stupid coins in this game weren't going to be useful, but they are. I was surprised that the combat in the game felt pretty good, but not the best. The melee was pretty smooth and the shooting worked well enough, although sometimes aiming can be a little difficult, especially at those enemies that like to charge you. My one thing when it comes to combat is that I wish at the beginning of the game I had the ability to punch. It's a good while before you get the first weapon, the pocket knife, and you still have to deal with enemies, so it would be handy to be able to do a basic punch. You can do it in the Not a Hero DLC, so why not in the main game? My other complaint about this game is about the weapon system. What I mean is at the start of the game you get the Glock 17 handgun, and then you eventually get the M1911 handgun, and you pick, which one you want on you. The trade-off is that using the M1911 is it has 7 rounds in the magazine, but it does more damage. To me, more damage is an obvious no-brainer, so no matter how many more times I'm reloading, I always want more damage. And, if you play the game more, you get permanent upgrades for your character that include improving your reload speed, and thus, this makes the trade of using the weapons that do more damage and have less ammo count basically non-existent. I get what Capcom was trying to do here, but I just don't think that it worked well as they thought it would. I don't know if it's different on harder difficulty, but that's how it was on the easier difficulty. Other than that, though, Resident Evil, it's got a great story, a great atmosphere, and good mechanics, and that all works to make a pretty good and enjoyable game. That's all I have to say. So if you add in the conversation, that's all I have to say. So if you like what you see in here, feel free to subscribe. If you want to add in the conversation, leave a comment below. As always, thanks for listening, and goodbye.